Hi friends, today in this video lecture I am going to talk about the important works of Anglo Saxon period. First of all, we need to understand in the Old English literature, poetry is the prominent one, not prose. Poetry is divided into three categories. First of all, the first one is the heroic poetry, second is lyric poetry, and third is the Christian poetry. Okay, now first let us look at the heroic poetry. One of the most famous heroic poetry is Beowulf. Beowulf is the greatest all-English poem, and the author of Beowulf is still unknown. It talks about the heroic adventures of a hero known as Beowulf, and the story takes place in Denmark. So Beowulf is basically a young warrior from southern Sweden who went to Denmark to help the king Hrothgar. Now Hrothgar had a great Met hall, which means a social gathering place, the center of royal festives, a place or a celebration. Hrothgar built this greatest men hall named Herot, Herot, and this Hrothgar is struggled by a great monster who is a lake monster. That while people used to sit in the Met hall, and in that hall the lake monster usually used to come and trouble the people. So Beowulf fought with the Grendel and barehanded, and he barehand the lake monster and he killed it. And the Grendel's mother come to take revenge for her son's death, but Beowulf killed her in the home lake. So first he killed Grendel, and then later he killed his mother and came to take revenge. So she's come to take her revenge by killing her son, and Beowulf also killed her. Later Beowulf became the king and ruled the country peacefully for 50 years. After a period of 50 years, Beowulf defeated a dragon. Okay, dragon comes and troubles the people in his country, so he fought with the dragon and defeated it. But during the battle, he is mortally wounded and he dies. So after his death, his attendants cremate his body and erect a tower on the headland of his memory. This is actually the story of Beowulf. So Beowulf is considered as the first story written in English language. Scholars think that the story originated around 500 AD or something and was written between 700 to 750 AD, and it was probably by a monk. Okay, it is a heroic poem or story about the adventures of larger than life characters. It is a told story and were passed down from generation to generation. They were members of the royal court and ancient historians. We are reading a condensed version of this story. The original poem consists of 3,182 lines, 3,182 lines. Our translated version is slightly over 800 lines only, 800 lines only. The central theme of poetry is good versus evil. Okay, you don't need to read it, you just need to remember the story why I taught. What I taught in this video lecture. Okay. Also, the poem gives about the interesting picture of life and attitude of the people during in those days. It talks about heroic deeds and how people used to suffer. It describes about the life of the world and terrible creatures which Beowulf have to fight and defeat. The poem has alliterative words and stress poetic lines without rhymes. These are the two poetic features, that is alliterative words and stress poetic lines without rhymes. Another important thing is use of literary device, that is kenning. I taught about kenning in my Anglo Saxon video lecture. That is the use of compound words to denote something to describe indirectly. For example, the candle of heaven. Here candle it denotes sun. Light of battle, which denotes the sword. And the ring giver. The ring giver here denotes the king. Okay, J.R.R. Tolkien describes and illustrates many features of Old English poetry in his essay on translating Beowulf. He is a poet, philologist and essayist. He was the author of the classic high fantasy works like The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. William Morris also wrote the translation of Beowulf. So these two prominent English writers, one is J.R.R. Tolkien and William Morris, English writers, worked on the translation and adaptation of Beowulf. The second important heroic poetry is the Walder. The poem is basically about the legend of Walder of Aquitaine. Walder of Aquitaine is basically a post, a post in the court. Okay, Walder was written by Heinz Jonathan. Walder or Voltaire is a conventional title given to two old English fragments from a lost epic poem discovered in 1860 by E.C. Wellruff. Wellruff is Werlauf, Wellruff, who is a librarian. The portion that was found was a part of a much bigger work. What remains of the poem comes in two parts, written on two separate single leaves, usually called fragment first and fragment second, and generally dated about 1000. Okay, the date of the poem composition is unknown. It's generally dated as 1000th century. 1000 date was in the year 1000, I think so. The date of the poem composition is unknown. The poem is the only proof that is known that the Anglo Saxon people had any knowledge of the legend of Walter of Aquitaine. This was a very popular story in Middle Ages, and the story is about Walter of Aquitaine and the Hildegard. Hildegard, who is another man. Another woman who fall in love with love and steal the treasure from the court of Attila, where there kept was the hostage. Okay, Walter of Aquitaine and Hildegard were lovers. And who fall in love with each other and steal the treasure from the court of Attila. Attila means Attila, Attila, where there kept a hostage. There is another king of Burgundy and Haguena. These two men are after the treasure that Walder and Hildegard possess. These two people constantly chases the treasure. Okay, the poem is about the conflict that takes place between the two parties. Okay, you just need to remember the brief summary that I taught in this lecture. Okay, the third important poem is Fight at Finsbury. This is an old English heroic poem which talks about the fight in which Hanif and his 60 retrainers. Okay, Hanif, H-N-A-E-F, Hanif. Okay, his 60 retainers, Hanif and his 60 retainers tried to hold off the attackers at the Finns fort. The fourth important heroic poetry is Wildsith. Wildsith is basically a poem of a Scop or a poet that I taught in the last lecture. That is, Scop is a poet who describes the adventurers. He praised the heroes in his period. That is his duty. Okay, Scop's duty, or a poet who is talking about the survey of people, kings and heroes of Europe in the heroic age of Northern Europe. So it's actually a traveler song of 143 lines. That's all. This four heroic poetry we want to remember. Next, more on the lyrical. We just not more any poems we want to remember in this heroic poem in Anglo-Saxon period. Okay, let us move on to the lyric poetry. The first important lyric poetry during the Old English literature is the Wanderer. You all heard about the Wanderer. I know that it is about an old man who talks about an attack that happened in his youth, where his close friends and kin is basically family members. His close friends and his family members were dead in that war. Okay, and the memories of this slaughter are remained with him all his life. The wise man who encourages that the people should resolve matter peacefully and should not rush into the battle, and he finds little glory in his bravery. For getting bravery or praise from others, don't rush into the battle. He just taught the moral side of the peace about the youth of the people of his country. Okay, the second important lyric poetry is Seafarer. Now, Seafarer describes the desolate hardship of life on a winterly sea. So basically, Seafarer is a person who go for a voyage to the sea, and He basically talks about the conditions like the cold, bitterness, solitude in the sea voyage, in contrast to life, land where men are surrounded by kingsmen, free from dangers and full of food and wine. He want whatever he get from the land. Okay, he suffered a lot from the winterly sea. That he says in this poem. He says that the climate of the land far more safer than the sea. Yet he says that he earns from the sea, and his poem Seafarer has been translated multiple times, most notably by American poet Ezra Pound. Okay, you must remember that the Seafarer was mainly translated and famously known by the American poet Ezra Pound. The third important lyric poetry is The Wife's Lament. The poem is basically about the grief of the female speaker, and it represents her state of despair. The next important lyric poetry is Deor's Lament. Deor means D-E-O-R. He's basically a singer who has lost his Lord's favor. Okay, let's come to the point. Deor, who was replaced, is God. He is a musician in a Lord's court, I think so. So he was replaced from this court by another minstrel and deprived of his lands and his Lord's favor. Okay, because of this, Deor is very hurt by himself. Okay, so he complains, but then first of all he complaining to the Lord or complaining himself to get hurt by his Lord, and he tried to comfort himself by remembering others' sorrow of the world. So every time he talks about his sorrow, then he, in order to comfort he says that the people are suffered so much, and then he says that this is to shall past. Okay, whenever he thought about his sorrow, he himself getting comfortable by remembering others' sorrow, the other person who were living in the world. They were there, and he says that their all sorrows were past, and his also were passed by time. Okay, the next important lyric poetry is Husband's Message. It is a story of a man who is forced to live in his home land, okay, without his wife due to a war. So the poem basically takes place after the war has ended, and now he talks about that he is now wealthy after the war has ended, and he crafts a message on wood and sent to his wife, counting the past life without her, reflecting on his past misfortunes, professing his love for her. He's trying to explore the relationship of love with his wife, okay, through the letters. He wants to reunite with his wife in his new home. So these are the few important lyric poetry written during the Old English literature. Okay, now let's move on to the Christian poetry. In Christian poetry, first of all, there are three major poets you want to remember, and there are some important contributions to English literature. The first important poet is Caedmon. Caedmon is a young shepherd who is not able to sing. There is a practice in the monastery in those times. The people who used to practice passing the harp around, whereas people who would dance, sing turn by turn. Harp is basically a musical instrument. People were reluctant to pass the harp to the poor Caedmon because he lacks singing skills. So Caedmon is he's a good person and is a very poor shepherd, and Caedmon is very upset. He went to sleep, and while sleeping he saw a dream, and in the dream he had a dream of God, who appears and tells him to sing of his creation. After he woke up from his dream, he not only able to sing, also able to write songs as well. Caedmon is also the first English poet, and he got this miraculous power from God. So Caedmon, only the surviving works that we know is the Caedmon's hymn, and this poem basically written to honor the God, to praise the God. He written the Caedmon's hymn to praise the god. He learned it due to its initial sleep. All his poetry are about his sacred dreams and mostly about turning men from sin to righteousness. Okay, his main aim to write poem is about the young man, the young men who were doing sin. Okay, and he want to change the people's mind from sin to righteousness. He is called the Anglo Saxon Milton. Caedmon is called as the Anglo Saxon Milton. Why? Because Milton wrote about God. Milton is a person who wrote about God, and similarly Caedmon wrote about God. So he called as Anglo Saxon Milton. The next important poet is Bede. Bede. Bede wrote a work called Ecclesiastical History of English People. It is a book which talks about the early Anglo-Saxon England. It is basically about the development of Christianity in England. It was written in Latin and later it is translated to Old English by King Alfred. Bede also talks about the life of Caedmon, about his life and how he composed poems. The third important poet is Cynewulf. Cynewulf. Okay. You all know about Cynewulf. He is famous for his religious composition. He wrote poems like the Fates of the Apostles, Juliana, Elena, and Christ Second. So he is very important poet because he is the first poet who gives a sign in his poem. So he signed his poem, so we can easily determine it was written by Cynewulf. Okay, he is the first person who introduced signature in his poetry. Okay, these are the three main Christian poets. One important Christian poetry you have to remember is The Dream of the Rood. Rood, R-O-O-D. The Dream of the Rood. Rood means cross. It is about a poem that which the narrator is having a dream. He is speaking to cross. Cross means the cross is where the Jesus Christ died. Okay, he is speaking to that cross. The poem is divided into three separate sections. First section he talks about the vision of the cross, and second section the cross shares the account of Jesus Christ's death, and the section 3 the author gives his reflection about his vision that he had about the cross. Okay, the first section talks about the vision he had get from the cross. Okay, his vision about the cross, and the second section the cross shares the account of the death of Jesus Christ and the lives of Jesus Christ. Okay, the third section is a reflection about his vision, who's the poet's vision that he had about the cross, and then he felt he left with the thoughts and he gave praises to God, and he should be hopeful for his entire life, and he decided to go once again in the glorious cross. How the poem ends how it ends, it's like this. At last the poet hopefully for his entire life, he hopeful to his entire life, and he once again want to go to the glorious cross. So we completed the Anglo-Saxon poetry. Now let's move to the Anglo-Saxon prose. I have already said in the last video lecture that prose didn't develop before Christianity. Okay, the Christianization in England. After the Christianization, the prose developed in England. Okay, King Alfred too. He was one of the greatest king. King Alfred, also known as the Great, the Alfred the Great. Okay, he encouraged the education, who proposed the idea that education taught in English rather than Latin language. So he is a great king who ruled the Anglo-Saxon England in 800 AD. Not only changes he gives, not only changes in the legal system, or not only the military changes, but also encourages education. He also translated several books from Latin to Old English. He also started Anglo-Saxon Chronicles. Okay, Anglo-Saxon Chronicle is basically a sort of book that used to publish every year, and he continuously published it in 300 years. This is the only historical record of Anglo-Saxon history. Those books, that means the Anglo-Saxon Chronicles, were the historical records of Anglo-Saxon history. So now only through this book we only get the proofs about the people who lived in the Anglo-Saxon community. Okay? So that's like that's the main important thing in the Anglo-Saxon prose history. King Alfred the Great encourages the education. So he started the Chronicle, Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, and it's basically a sort of books that published in every year, and it is the historical record of Anglo-Saxon society. So that's it, guys. Hope you understand this lecture. So till we meet again, keep learning, stay safe, and stay tuned to KeyNotes.